June, welcome back. We're all here now.
Thank you.
At least all that I know is going to be here. We had a couple of folks who were going to be in this group who weren't able to be with us today. So we're going to be talking. We're going to be talking in our group, and it is a conversation we're going to be having about appreciative coaching towards adaptive leadership and resilience. And to paraphrase John Wesley, I have consented to be more vile in these last several years to do work like this without a PowerPoint slide to accompany my process or my agenda. So it's going to be a conversation. I do have a shape for the conversation, but you'll guess what it is. It's appreciative, and there'll be some information that we will share, but mostly it's going to be a peer learning kind of experience, because you are in the thick of it in every one of your settings, as every person on the face of the planet is, of adapting in the midst of a strange time, of seeking to be disciples in a time of mass disruption, and of trying to find a way towards resilience in the midst of it. So we're as much of an expert as anybody who's written a book about how to do this, because I can guarantee you that the folks who wrote the books spent less time figuring this out than you have over the last 9 months before they wrote the books. There are a lot of good books out there. Ron Heifetz and Grashow and Linsky wrote a book called Practices of Adaptive Leadership back, I don't know, 15 years ago, probably. The theme of which my takeaway from it, you may have read it and have a lot of other takeaways, is that there's a difference between technical management and adaptive leadership. And in technical management, that you have a well-defined problem for which there might be a well-defined solution. Not always. And so that kind of a problem they call a technical problem. It's a problem that is well-defined and might have a well-defined solution. And so ordinary leadership and management is just fine for that. You know, when I was a boy, I was fascinated with cars and with engines. And so my dad came home one day, and I had disassembled the small motor on the lawnmower. And I had taken it down to its component parts, and I had them all arranged on the driveway. It was trying to understand how that thing worked. And my dad came in from work with his coat and tie on, and he just looked at me and he said, "Better work when you put it back together, son." And it did, because it was a technical problem. It was a well-defined problem with a well-defined solution. You put things back together the way you took them apart, and odds are good that if you aren't completely incompetent, that you'll be able to get it to work again. Adaptive leadership is useful whenever you're in a poorly defined set of circumstances, or you're in a place of great ambiguity and uncertainty, and you're not confident that there is a well-defined answer to what's before you. And so Heifetz and others contended that in adaptive leadership, the key skill to be developed is to ask better questions, to ask more questions, to ask better questions. We were all exposed to Michael Buggy Steyer's book, Talk Less, Ask More, the coaching habit book. That's an approach that is adaptive. Talk less, ask more, learn more. We were exposed a couple of years ago to Todd Bolsinger's book, Canoeing the Mountains, which attempted to define the circumstances that we find the church in that same kind of context, that we had moved from a time of leadership in the church, which was technical in nature, where you would walk into a church and you, as the expert, could have a well-defined understanding. Claire, you were kind of pointing to that with systems theory, that there was a family systems understanding of church that was going to give you a well-defined answer to what's going on and some solutions for that. But Bolsinger's contention is that we've moved out of that phase of the life of the church, and we've moved into an adaptive phase where the answers are no longer solving our problems, that we have moved into a completely different landscape and a completely different ambiguous set of circumstances. And again, his advocacy for a solution is to look to Lewis and Clark, that we do this together, that there's an egalitarian kind of thing that happens, a shift from a wise leader who tells everyone what to do to a core of discovery, who works together to figure it out, and that you look for guides along the way who might have some experience in the setting that you're in, but who might come from a completely different point of view, perspective, ethnic group, life experience than you do, in order to get through the time. And then there's a more recent book, Susan Beaumont's book, which is How to Lead When You Don't Know Where You're Going, which kind of is a reflection on all of that work, translated into pre-COVID church life. And her main focus was on liminality, times between times, that we have moved out of one age, and the age that we're moving into is uncertain. And that there are certain things that you stop doing in a liminal space, certain things that you start doing in a liminal space that provide you with a way forward. So with that kind of orientation to adaptive, I wonder, what have you learned about the practices of adaptive leadership, or the practices of adaptive discipleship in your setting? Where have you seen that kind of adaptation taking place, where you didn't just go back to a well-defined answer to a well-defined problem, or translate the canoeing work that you were doing before into the mountains that you're living now, but instead something new has emerged that is truly adaptive for this moment in time? Does anything ring a bell to you in your life and ministry and practice that has been truly adaptive?
I think for me, Steve, back in the summer, before the George Floyd murder in late May, when the numbers were ticking up disproportionately among the African American community around the pandemic, Bishop Hope called the Black clergy together and asked us what we needed. And we had conversation, and that led to a proposal, that led to a grant, that led to an opportunity to bring the Black clergy. Actually, it was open to everyone, but it was focused on the Black clergy for a 12-week seminar. And working closely with Chris Brady and Albert Schuler, and just exploring that, dreaming about it, thinking about it. The easy go-to is to call your Methodist buddies and gals, BMCR, SBC 21. And we decided that the crises afforded us an opportunity to cast the net a little bit wider. And the commonality wasn't the denomination, the commonality was the pandemic. And so we were able to get national names, thank God, that otherwise probably would not have accepted, because they probably would have said, well, you've got Methodist circles, you've got resources, tap into those resources. But because we had to be agile, we had to think collectively. This idea of collective bargaining in the church setting took precedence over everything else. And we had to set our egos aside, and we had to, in some respects, part church polity and church politics, and say, you've asked us in a very, I want to believe it was a very generous, that bishops calling us together, Bishop Hope calling us together, it was very gracious. And then inviting 2 other conferences to participate in it was gracious. And it all came together because I think we were all in a place of uncertainty, charting new territory and trying to find our way around that daggone mountain.
Yeah. So what did you hear in Regina's story of an adaptive experience that stood out for you?
I heard a willingness to suspend traditional partnerships, or at least expand. I don't know if suspend
Yeah.
is the best word, but to be curious about who else wants to do this work. I attended that event. It was an excellent event.
Thank you. What else did you hear that was adaptive?
I heard a willingness to try something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes along with that is to try something different, even if you're not sure how it's going to turn out.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, so many times the choices we make are predicated on whether we're pretty sure it's going to work. And when you're doing adaptive leadership, you have to have that freedom to miss or, freedom to, I don't want to use the word fail, but freedom for it not to turn out the way you expected.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's even if it's not expected, it's a blessing, but you have to have the willingness to try something new, even if you're not sure about how it's all going to work.
Yeah.
I got a couple of things
Yeah.
that just came out, from watching this. One, your discussion of the technical problem.
Yeah.
I wonder if that isn't a failure on our part to solve problems in the technical way. If we were more open, I don't think we should be talking about adaptive leadership like it's something new and strange. It's something that we should have been doing all along.
Mm.
And when I listen to Regina talk, what comes to my mind is she's talking about putting aside all of these barriers that were in place to try this new thing, where I wonder those barriers shouldn't have been there. If maybe we were taking that technical approach to answering questions, and if we had been more adaptive, there wouldn't have been the barriers to fight through to make the new ideas come out.
I like that. That's a great insight. Thank you. Does that ring true to you, Regina? Does that sound?
Absolutely. Yeah, toward the end, we were thinking, why hadn't we been doing this before?
Yeah.
And the question of how do we keep it going? So it's this idea of building blocks, but that's even secondary. Just the intent of living in the moment of each of those webinars was the priority.
Mm-hmm. I also heard a willingness, to push beyond what what the authorities might have intended. So Bishop Hope gathered the folks together. She had something in mind. Somebody gave a grant. They had something in mind. But you took courage as a group and said, we can make this our own. And you did, and it turned out, to exceed your expectations and probably exceeded their expectations. Okay, good. Thank you. Is there anything else you want to highlight from this experience that Regina described?
One of the things that you said that I'm processing still is that Regina, that you felt like that being reached out to was in good faith. That may not have been your exact word, but and so I just was thinking about the willingness to trust, that when if different alignments or possibilities are occurring, that that in some ways there's a leap of faith in the midst of that opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that laying aside of ego, and also the laying aside of, and I think this is to Jim's point of traditional kind of positions of authority. You know, that I should be the one to tell you what to do because of my position of authority that I'm in. That you laid aside some of that to allow other voices to be heard in the room. Okay, so let's we could explore this more, but let me hear. You know, Regina came first, had a lovely story of adaptation. Does somebody else have a place that you've seen some adaptive leadership work in your setting, and that you'd like to describe? So the model that we're using for this conversation is a model that came out of some adaptive learning from, you know, on my part. I mentioned. Go ahead, Nancy.
I was going to say it's not necessarily a specific event or project, but in terms of adaptive responses and adaptive leadership, what has happened in the church where I serve is that staff job descriptions have gone out the door. That program ministries that formerly had been functioning interrelated but separate. You know, you had children over here and youth over there and missions over there and whatever. And now it's as a response to an all hands on deck type of response, but people are doing things that were never in their job descriptions or that were in somebody else's, and that's been okay because we have not degenerated into any kind of turf war or pride of ownership of specific tasks or specific oversight. But now it's kind of like everybody's doing whatever's necessary in the moment, and we are listening to input from people that we probably wouldn't have listened to before. So that in the process of, for instance, solving issues around live stream and technology, I'm not sure we would have listened to the head of the maintenance team before, but he had some really good insight, and then we all went, oh, we hadn't thought of that. And so it has given everybody the freedom to contribute and the freedom to do whatever is needed in the moment, but to do it in a cooperative way and not so much as a, you know, this is going to be my moment to be the savior of the whole mess or the, you know, the bright shining star or anything like that. It's more of, it was really a canoeing in the mountains type response. You know, what do we need to do to figure out how to do this, because where we are is surely on no map at all. There is no book that anybody's written about how to do this. There's no book that, there's no instruction manual. So, I mean, I joke with us that, you know, sometimes I feel like Indiana Jones, because we're just making this up as we go along. And but in a not in a Keystone Cops kind of way, but although there have been some days like that. But it's more of an adaptive, and it's freedom from our traditional. We don't all have to stay in our own lanes all the time anymore, and we're free to share whatever knowledge and insight that we have.
Thank you, Nancy. So what did y'all hear were the features of adaptation that Nancy was highlighting?
I mean, obvious adaptation is, the job descriptions were kind of thrown out the door, and new understanding of how to operate with each other were discovered and tried to, figured out in a new way.
Yeah. And there was a sense of urgency created. We've all felt a bit of that urgency, but in this case, the urgency was owned by a group of people who put themselves together to work on things. To Jim's point again, one of the things that emerged was that there were people who were able to offer expertise, wisdom, observations that were way outside their job description's purview that might never have been heard before or listened to. Kind of like, Sacagawea helping Lewis and Clark find their way through the mountains. And what needed to be true of the people in order for this to happen? What did you hear Nancy describe? What had to be true of the people who were doing this so that this kind of coming together could happen?
It seems like there's an element of humility. The virtue of humility is maybe found its way around that staff table or virtual table, however you meet, and the ways that, when there's an urgent need, to your point, when there's an urgent need, one, people can ask or feel comfortable in saying, I need help here. That takes an element of humility. And then for someone to think in their minds and in their hearts, well, think about the need more than their job description. Well, it's not in my job description, but clearly Nancy needs a little help here. I'm willing to do that because it's the Christian thing to do. And sometimes we don't always put that as a priority. We like to operate out of our silos, our comfy zones, and have our level of territory, especially in a large membership church, because you're protecting your worth and your value in that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at some point, you got to fill out an evaluation form.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. How is our value conveyed? How is it preserved? How is it stewarded?
Steve, an interesting aside to that, thank you for mentioning that, Regina. We're using a totally different personnel evaluation this year.
I bet.
And it has more to do with what have you learned, how have you grown, and what do you need? What would be helpful moving forward, and we've gotten responses everywhere from, God help me learn more about technology. Nobody told me I was going to have to be an electrical engineer to serve in a church, but so we're not even looking at the same type of job performance evaluation things at all. We're looking more like how collaborative, how has that worked for you?
Yeah, good. Now we're looking at this through the lens of coaching and coaching towards this kind of adaptation. So when you're in a circumstance where the person who you're working with or the group that you're working with is in ambiguous circumstances, uncertain times, a vague sense of what's before them. What does the coach do? What could the coach do that would be helpful to move towards the kinds of adaptations that Nancy and Regina have described? What does the coach do? What could the coach do with someone who's in ambiguous circumstances to help someone like Nancy or Regina live into this kind of adaptation that they've done? What comes to mind for you?
I think for one, it's help the pastor or whoever's you're coaching know that they don't have to have the solution, right? To be adaptive is what you said earlier, is to ask questions, not to come up with the grand solution. So, to somewhat as a coach to encourage an atmosphere of, or a way in which the team can ask questions amongst themselves to maybe become part of the solution together.
I like that. Yeah.
A question we asked amongst our group frequently was, who do you need to bring alongside to move things along? Or is there someone who might be better at this than you are?
What other kinds of questions would help?
One of the questions we asked from the very get-go is something clarifying questions about, well, what is it we're trying to do? Because otherwise it really does degenerate into a Keystone Cops type thing. If everybody in the group isn't moving more or less in the same direction with the same goal or the same desired outcome, so those questions that right at the beginning is, what is it we're trying to do and why?
And why? Yeah. What is it we're trying to do and why? Those great questions.
I think another question I would ask is, where have you found joy since the last time we spoke or in the last week to help the coachee reflect or support the coachee as she reflects upon her experiences in the midst of this pandemic or wherever we are, that there is opportunity and there are experiences of joy and hope. And sometimes we have to pause, step back and reflect in order to find it.
I like that. So, right, and this is something that we bring to the table because we're living through it too. That hope is there, but it's not widely distributed, or not evenly distributed. Yeah. Something that comes to mind for me is to examine, what's changed. Now, when you ask that question of somebody, they'll say, what hasn't? And the answer is there are some things that haven't changed. But it's unclear what those things that haven't changed are in a time like this when everything seems to have shifted. So figuring out what's changed and what hasn't can be a way of examining the boundaries or the scope of what you're up against. Another thing that I've found helpful is when you're thinking about that why and what is it we're trying to do and why, is to also examine, what are the assumptions that we're operating under here? And which of those assumptions needs to be examined again, taken out and looked at? So we're talking about, go ahead. Oh, Claire, were you going to say something? Did I interrupt you?
I will if you got
Yeah, go, Jim.
just a couple of things come to mind in the conversation.
Thank you.
When you talk about change and what happened, I think the question is that bad?
Hmm.
And why is that bad? Because I think we have to keep the lens of opportunity alive in the conversation.
Yeah.
Just because things have gone to hell in a handbasket the way we used to define them doesn't mean that we won't be better after we come out of this. And we have this great opportunity for change right now. And are we using that to its best advantage, I guess?
I love that. Thank you, Jim.
I was thinking, I think it's similar to what you said, Steve, but I was trying to think of something that could be asked that encourages people to think of the adaptation as something that that there's permission to not continue it if it's not working. So some sort of, how would you know, if this is doing what you want, clarity around, if it's working, great. But if it's not, it's okay to say, well, we tried that. It didn't yield what we were hoping for. So there's some spaghetti on the wall. So I don't know. I mean, some of that I think is hard to get to know what it is you're hoping for, but some question that might just invite them to think about how they could let something go if
Okay.
it wasn't working.
Good.
Yes.
So let's move to a very specific, and you may be familiar with this syndrome based on where you're at in your church. A very specific aspect of discipleship that is at hand with a lot of churches. So I probably heard this from a dozen churches so far, or pastors so far, in my circle of coaching. That one of the things they're observing as they begin to move back inside of facilities for worship is that families with children are the trailing edge of those coming back, if they're coming back at all. And there's it's a relatively new phenomenon, and there's not a lot of insights about why that is. I talked to my daughter the other day about it. They live with us with our 3 granddaughters, and she said, she just said, because everybody's exhausted, Dad. And that may be it. I don't know. But let's say you have a client who's thinking, children and their families are not coming back to church. What do I do? What kind of questions would open up the possibility of adaptive thinking for a person in those circumstances?
One of the questions we asked from the get-go has been, are there other ways to engage those families and those children that don't require coming to a building at a specific date and time?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just do a plug for our children's department. They've been amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The number of things, small things, but things that engage families with children in ways that they feel comfortable engaging, and using a whole array of different things. But we just looked, okay, it's like that spotlight thing when you're, decisive, you just need to broaden your spotlight. There may be something else out there because this option is off the table. And where we're unique. We are still not doing anything worshiping in or classes or Sunday school in person. We are not. We're doing some limited gathering out of doors. very limited. But so this idea of gathering is still not an option for us. So we've asked people to be creative. Think of something some
Yeah.
other ways to engage folks.
Yeah. So let's approach that as a coach. How would you help someone, y'all were doing that kind of work within your staff,
Mhm.
but how would you approach this as a coach with someone who's just confronting this issue and realizing things have changed, families aren't coming back. What do I do?
Maybe. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd ask the same question. Are there other ways? Can you think of other ways to engage them that don't involve coming to the church?
Yeah.
I was thinking a similar question, but have you done any kind of research? If they're not coming to church, how are they engaged in the life of the church? And if they are getting fed through this, whatever it may be, how can we get more of that at this current time?
Mhm.
And I would ask, have you asked the families with children what they would like or would need, or, what do they want?
Mhm. Yeah, and how have you asked is an
Yeah.
important question. Yeah. What else would you ask to help someone gain some traction with adaptive thinking around the kind of discipleship that families with children might be looking for?
Maybe it's like since the pandemic started, what kind of stories have you heard of young families being connected with the church or something like that? Just kind of get them flowing on ways they are being connected and fruitful stuff that is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, and to that point, maybe more questions about how the family's lives are different now, and what impact that has. So
I think I would want to ask the pastor, I think this is a difficult question for me. I think I would want to ask the pastor what means and measures would need to be in place, in person or not in person, in order to feel comfortable in engaging families with children.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I have nothing in my mind right now of what that would be. That's the question that I would want to ask.
So one of the gifts it is to be a coach instead of the expert is that you have been practicing not being the expert and being comfortable with your unknowing, and using questions to help explore, even though you don't know all the answers. Now, sometimes you do. Sometimes you got all the answers, but we're still coaches, and we resist the urge to fill the silence with our expertise.
A question that I found useful, because the person that you are coaching knows their own context far better than you do. And sometimes it's as easy as saying, do you see any low-hanging fruit?
Yeah.
Do you see anything that's simple and doable fairly easily?
Looking for an early, easy win.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you ask that question, I, as the coach, I would have no idea. But this whole idea of trying to get them to broaden their vision.
Yeah.
I think another question I would ask is what do you know about this? What do you know? I want to say the needs, but I'm going to say, what do you know would help support families with children that you didn't know 6 months ago, or you didn't know 3 months ago, or you didn't know 6 weeks ago?
I like that kind of question. That really gets at the heart of what's changing. Yeah. And what's stayed the same. And to Jim's point, the changes may not all be bad. There may be something better. So I wonder if you, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Struggling to articulate these things today. One of the things that I know we've asked a lot is it's just really been a reality check that the things we thought people would miss, they're not telling us they miss.
Right.
Some of that is the exhaustion, that family and just the new way of doing what they have to do. But it could, I think I'm wondering about a question that just raises the opportunity, the reflection, the opportunity, what have people told you they miss and how can you offer that? What are you learning about what people aren't missing, and what does that tell you? And what are the things that, I mean, how could getting that feedback help you without just assuming you have to replace everything you've been doing?
Right. Yeah. So here's another way of approaching this, and that is to get into some specificity about outcomes. And so one of the things, if I've got this where I can get to it, one of the tools I've used before is, oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry. I have two of these open. Yeah, okay. So this comes out of a article about adaptive leadership, about the kinds of human outcomes that you might want to be looking at. I'll be happy to share this with you. You don't have to copy them down. So these are just kind of generic ones for a business organization, and I adapted them for thinking about outcomes from discipleship in the church. So thinking about families with children, looking through this list, which one of these do you think would be, so here we use Nancy Watson's, which one of these might be a low-hanging fruit that you could do some adaptive design around? And as you look at that list, why don't you just pick one and let's experiment with it, talking about this. So as an aside, I did this with my adaptive discipleship group last week that's been meeting for now, this is their 4th month together. And they decided that they wanted to work on improved peacemaking skills. And we had such a good conversation that I'm editing the audio. I think it'll be a podcast because it just was really beautiful to see the ways that they imagined adaptive leadership around peacemaking in this season of transition. So you pick one of these and just shout it out to me, and we'll use that as the focus. So this is the poetic principle at work: choosing what you want to focus on.
Kind of on the backside of the conversation we just had, young families aren't coming to church. Maybe ask some of those young families that the one that says more frequent faith sharing.
Okay.
Having the idea that young families probably have the capability or the ability to make a video. You're not going to be with us in worship. We understand what you're kind of going through. Can you make a video for us to share within worship about how you're growing in your faith through this pandemic?
Okay. Yeah. So you went straight from that outcome, and you have an idea about how to get there. Low-hanging fruit. We could ask them to shoot a video. That's something they could do. My 5-year-old can shoot a video of herself. I can testify to it. If she finds my phone, she knows the passcode. I'll find a video on it. So they can do that. Yeah. So you saw some low-hanging fruit immediately with that one. So let's explore that a little bit more as a coach. If somebody said, I'd like that more frequent faith sharing, what are some questions that you could ask as a coach that might help them adapt the work of leadership in the church so that the families with young children experience more frequent faith sharing. What could you ask to help a leader adapt the work of the church so that they experience more frequent faith sharing as an outcome?
How can you include more children, families with children in weekly online worship experiences?
Great question.
Where have you seen someone sharing a faith story be helpful in the life of the ministry? You know, just kind of take them back to an experience and then, okay, how can we make more opportunities for that now?
Yeah. The nice thing about that now, you know, Pete, to your point, is that there are lots of people sharing lots of things in public, and it's almost an overwhelming amount of stuff that people are sharing. But so somebody's very likely to have seen something that inspired them. Great question.
It's not a question, but tell me about a time when you shared your faith as a child or young person.
That's a question. It's an invitation to conversation. Yeah.
What conversations should you be hearing from your children about that could be shared?
Mm-hmm.
We've done a couple of intentional intergenerational sort of things where we've had people from a lot of different age groups be a part of the same conversation, including children. I'm just wondering how people might talk about what conversations do we want to hear from our children about for the church and model that their voice matters.
Yeah. So how has our conversation changed from when we were talking about children and their families are not showing up for church, and now we're talking about intentional faith sharing? What's different about the conversation that we're having right now from the one that we had before? Thank you, Virginia. You came with questions fast.
I would say it's broader, right? I mean, children and young families aren't coming to church is kind of narrow, right? So as we got to this topic, asking questions has kind of broadened the possibility of what's out there.
Yeah, you could imagine more possibilities. Okay, good. Yeah. So somebody who says, I don't know what to do, and you say, well, what's the outcome you're looking for? And if they can't imagine an outcome, you know, suggest some outcomes that they might explore. That's not an exhaustive list that I've put up on the screen. It's just a short list. But imagine an outcome and then ask questions as you just did, helping somebody explore, you know, what's the path to that outcome? And, you know, and the nice thing about that is that you're not assuming that getting the kids to come back into the Sunday school classrooms is the answer to all of this. The technical solution, let's get them back to Sunday school class. What you're doing is you're opening up the possibilities of the ways we could do this, get this outcome based on you know, what our current circumstances are. All right, so you know, when we're exploring this, you know, another thing, you know, and this goes back to Regina's comment earlier, that the clients that we're working with are living through a profound experience right now, and in some cases traumatic experience. And so what do they need from us as coaches as we're entering into a conversation with them, so that they can, you know, get to a place where they can, you know, be generative and explore possibilities? What have you learned in your coaching this last few weeks or these last couple of months that's been helpful in helping your client transition from whatever it was they were doing before they reached out to you for the call, and to be able to be their best selves, to be generative and open the door to positivity and possibility?
First thing that comes to my mind is encouragement.
Mm-hmm. What does encouragement look like, Pete, when you're entering into a call?
I mean, the opening conversations and what's going on, just look for ways to say that sounds like something that was really good to do. You know what I mean? Or just
Mm-hmm.
pick out opportunities to encourage within the first couple minutes.
Yeah. Find something worthy of praise. Thank you. That's good.
I think something as simple as beginning by asking, what do they want to talk about?
Mm-hmm.
So that, you know, you don't begin the session with, okay, where are you in your developmental plan? Because, you know, you have no idea what has happened to them, you know, in the past couple, 3 weeks. But
Right.
so as simple as asking, you know, what's on your heart? What's on your mind?
Yeah.
You know, tell me what's going on. So therefore you do have opportunities to be encouraging, but you also are listening.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's been my experience that that's the thing they want most, is for somebody to hear them,
Right.
somebody to listen.
Thank you.
Along the lines of encouraging, I've been intentional to ask, it's a Steve James question, how can I pray for you today?
Yeah.
And let there be a pregnant pause. And sometimes the coaches rattle off the same prayer every 2 weeks. I pray for the election, pray for my family, and pray for Aunt Rose. And then sometimes I hear a sigh,
Mm-hmm.
just of weariness. And they seem like they want to kind of get themselves together, like, okay, I didn't really mean to do that. And then even after lifting that up, you know, what we all were taught in pastoral care class, silence is golden, and seeing what bubbles up out of that. And I have found in 2020, unlike 2019, I spend more time listening, being an active listening around prayer, and that seems to help center us. Now, there are one or two, and I asked, how can I pray for you today? And I looked at the clock and it's 25 minutes later.
Yeah,
I think
that happens.
the person needs that day.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah.
I think that also builds up trust.
Yeah. And let's take this as the opportunity to talk about how you coach towards resilience in an uncertain time like we're in. How you coach towards resilience. So as you think about the articles that you read, we just looked at a list of spiritual outcomes that might be the case for a discipleship program. What are some of the either inputs or outcomes of someone being in a place of resilience? What are either the inputs or the outcomes of somebody being in a place of resilience? As you read those articles, what are some of the features of that?
One of the things to me was, in order to be resilient, you have to have hope.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's just kind of came to mind. I mean, just getting them to a place of hope. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah. We're going to come back to hope in just a minute. What else contributes to resilience based on what you read in articles? Putting you on the spot.
Acknowledging the struggle.
Yeah.
And the despair.
Acknowledging the struggle.
And that whole transitional piece. I can't remember his name right now. Managing in transition.
Mm-hmm.
That really spoke to me, because we jump from change to resilience, and sometimes not acknowledging the importance of that transition that happens. I wrote how that's really prominent in cross-cultural appointments, was part of my reflection. And when I didn't know to acknowledge the transition happening, it impacted my lack of resilience.
I think some way of, as a coach, I guess this is what I was trying to allude to earlier today, to listen for how to where you can point out if they don't see it. Here's an example of you being resilient. I hear resilience in this moment. What did that feel like for you? What was going on that allowed you to offer this response? Or, and something that, I know sometimes when I, can listen for that with someone and just offer it, I oftentimes am met with surprise that folks did not see that in themselves. But when you can acknowledge it, then they go, oh, that's what you were talking about, So I just think sometimes, if people can hear that you have seen them doing it, it gives them courage to do it again because they realize they can do it.
That's a great point. Yeah. So affirming places where you've seen their resilience. It's something I've noticed in, some of the folks I've coached for, 3, 4, 5 years. And so I've been with them through a lot of stuff. And there are times that it's helpful to just recite some of the things they've been through with you, and then to affirm, you did that. You got through that. You are here now at this place, and you just said this, and that's resilience. And they say, wow, yeah, because they have, sometimes they're right in the moment, and you've got your folder with all your notes and have a historical perspective that they may not be able to get to. And that can offer them some resilience. Yeah. Jim?
I think that idea of recalibration of imagination is a good one. Yeah. I think that forces you to, in light of whatever the crisis is, whatever has brought you to this moment, the idea of recalibration of imagination takes that into light into your forward thoughts. I also think I find in coaching, and I don't really know how to say this, so I'm going to just say it, and it's probably going to be kind of weird, but
I bet it'll be good.
If you have a diet of bread and water, and somebody introduces you to cake, you're not going to want to necessarily go back to bread and water, okay? Because you like that cake. Well, what's happened is in religion, I believe, that we have, digress a minute, religion is always like a glacier, it's moving very slowly. But what's happened in this period of time, it's been forced to move very quickly. And a lot of these new ideas have been put out there as a response to the negative, okay? And you're not going to be able to put them back in a box because some people like those things. Some people like what they see in them. And the church has, for lack of a better word, blessed them by putting them out there as alternates. So we have to grow and move forward and find the things that still allow us to practice the religion appropriately with the new world ideas. And I think we don't go back in the box. We have to have this, whatever this new thing's going to be, and whether it's to get young people into church or whatever, you have to go to the source and find out, what do they like? What has kept them religious? They're not necessarily less religious. They don't believe less in God because the pandemic came and the church couldn't meet every day. They just have a new way of approaching it. And unfortunately, the church has legitimized it all because that's the way we've reached them through the process. Okay. I know that's a real crazy answer, but that's a lot of things I was thinking while you were talking.
Yeah, and you've described well, this ambiguous moment for the church that we responded quickly to offer things, in some respects perhaps out of our anxiety and fear, and some of those things are like cake. They have some ease to them and some traction to them. Folks want to continue. So I'm hearing, a number of pastors who are saying, well, we're online, we live stream, we have a recorded version, we do sermon by phone, drive-in worship, and we're in the sanctuary on Sunday morning. And they are, just listening to them say it, I'm exhausted, because they've had to figure out how to do all of that. And they're coping, but in some respects it's unsustainable. It may not be the kind of nourishment that people need. So there's that feature, and then that's the context that we're in. That's the struggle. To pretend it's not a struggle is not a source of resilience. It's acknowledging the struggle that's a critical element of this. So with all of that being said, and you're helping someone move, and in this respect, I think we're doing this with everybody we're coaching. You're helping everybody we're coaching move towards resilience. That is one of our core values. What needs to be true of each coaching call so that these elements of resilience, remain a part of our conversation? What needs to be true of your coaching calls so that these points of resilience remain a part of the conversation? And I'll just go through them. Acknowledging the struggle, that life is difficult, that what our pastors and other people that we're coaching are up against is really and truly hard and challenging, that there's an ambiguity to it and uncertainty about whether or not we're doing the right things. The transitional experience, that we have to respect that it's not just a struggle or hope, but there's a place of in between, a liminal space, a transitional space that people are occupying. And then that recalibration of the imagination and the sources of hope that people have. So with all of that, being a part of this, what needs to be true of you in your coaching conversations so that those elements, remain a part of the conversation?
I want to go back to Nancy's point of, we have 60 minutes and there's the temptation to rush to the development plan, and sometimes taking the foot off the gas and checking in with them as their whole person.
Mm-hmm.
And just helping them understand you really care.
Mm-hmm.
For if nothing else, the next 60 minutes, you're my priority. I care about you, and checking your notes so you can ask how, Anne, the wife, is doing, the spouse is doing, and calling that person by name.
Good. Yeah. So not rushing the agenda.
Right.
Yeah. Keeping. Yeah. Go ahead, Nancy.
One thing I found valuable and I try to keep it in front of me is that, while we are acknowledging that what they're doing is hard and that there is a struggle, and I haven't heard much reference to this. It's something I learned a long time ago from our Greek Orthodox friends, that to acknowledge that there is value in the struggle. So that the struggle is not a waste of energy or waste of time, or I mean, even if you don't end up where you think you want to be, that if there's a way that you can ask the question so that the person can discover the value in the struggle for them. And you know, because I really do believe there's value in it. You do get stronger as you deal with this kind of stuff. So I think sometimes you have to intentionally look for the value in it. And sometimes that's as simple as saying, has there been a bright lining to this cloud anywhere along the way? You know, what are the unexpected good byproducts of what you've been going through?
One of the things for me is you know, and those of you that work with me, I hope you see this in our call or hear this in our calls. You know, that I want to make sure I begin and end, as Pete said, with encouragement, affirmation, positivity, but not divorce that from the struggle or pretend that it's not a part of the struggle to be in that you know, hopeful place. And I also ask frequently that idea of the community of hope. I don't assume that our pastors are finding hope in the community that they serve actively. They may be, and I hope they will, but sometimes pastors need a community of hope outside that congregation that they're serving. And so to ask them, you know, who is it that helps you along the way? And, you know, I have a few of them say, well, you know, you're my only friend. Well, that's dangerous. You know, if the coach is the one that listens to them. I'm glad they look forward to that. But, you know, I'm going to ask who else, you know, and who do you need to reach out to? And what I've often found is that the folks will say something like, well, oh yeah, there's somebody I need to talk to. I haven't talked to them in, oh, has it been that long? And they know where their sources of hope are, and they've neglected to reach out. So
this conversation reminds me of the mother elder in the Black church. If you watched any Tyler Perry movies or experienced them yourself, you know, she's the one all dressed up in the suit and in the stockings and the heels and the hat. Don't forget the hat. And she sits on the first or second pew, probably right up under the preacher. And, you know, the beauty of her presence is that she reminds the church of the struggle. And she's the one who will sit on the mourner's bench, and she's the same one who will dance in the aisles, you know, after the third point of the sermon is made and the preacher says, ain't he all right, ain't he all right? And she, you know, she's the one who the little girl will go and get a piece of candy out of her pocketbook because she's really drawing that child in to impart knowledge upon her. Now, child, don't do that again. Child, make sure that light is out when you serve as acolyte next time, you hear? She brings that balance that no one else can do. Now, when she stands up, you know it's gonna take, you're gonna shave 7 minutes off the worship service. Because she's imparting that wisdom and knowledge. It's frustrating in the moment as a worship leader, but she does what nobody else will do in that worship space. And that's who everybody will talk about, sitting around the table, eating fried chicken and mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese and sweet tea at Sunday dinner. At least that's what it used to be. So there is this, you know, there's this balance and tension, and need, giving and receiving, all of that, I think creates that hope of resilience.
What a lovely description. Thank you.
You know, that what you just said, Regina, reminds me of one of the takeaways, the strongest takeaways for me in the reading that we did for today, which was tying, sort of understanding the scriptures through the lens of this is the life of a people of resilience. And so when we talk about our own stories of resilience, and we might ask, where might you see yourself in this story, or what biblical story does this remind you of, or something like that? We're not just remembering the scriptures, we're remembering the scriptures are the stories of the people of resilience. And we are formed in that story ourselves. And so, you know, finding a way, you triggered it for me about the person in the church who carries that, you know, who embodies that, the struggle and the resilience in the stories, exactly, is we see what it looks like when somebody embodies the scripture that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Harwa says, our story is a part of God's story.
Yeah, and that's part of the value of the community of hope, is that you gather together, and the mama elder, you know, imparts her wisdom, and the preacher imparts her wisdom, and the children bring wisdom, and, you know, folks acknowledge the struggle, and they're able to find, you know, their burden lightened because other people help carry it with you. That's the community of hope. So pointing people back to the, you know, the reality that we have that. How do we have that? Maybe uniquely to them, something that's different for you. And so asking questions to help them reclaim their community of hope is going to be really powerful. And I love the ways that y'all described that. So they're gonna kick us back into the room here in just a minute or so. Well, maybe 3 minutes or so. So I wonder, what are you going to take away from this part of our conversation today? I know you love this question, Jim.
I like how you started off, Steve. You said adaptive leadership is the ability to ask more questions, and just to be reminded of that.
Thank you, Pete.
I'm taking away a vivid image of the mama elder.
Yeah. Thank you, Regina, for sharing yours in the chat room.
I'm taking away the importance of having your community of hope.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. June, we haven't heard your voice, so even if it's just to say hello, we'd love to hear your voice for a moment.
Thank you, Steve. And I've had to come to a different room because my Power Beats ran out of power.
Okay.
Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed this time. I'm coming back into coaching. I've not had a coachee for a couple of years now. So I've just been doing a lot of listening and observing. So I guess my takeaway is how much I appreciate having this opportunity to be with everybody and to learn from each other. I've learned a lot again. Once again, I've learned more than I knew before I started.
Good. Thank you. Well, and my takeaway is I'm just so grateful. You know, each one of you has contributed to this time that we've had together. And this is at the heart for me of what adaptive learning is about. Whenever we're moving through a transitional time, and in our lives, in the life of the church, in the life of the world. To not count on, needing to know all the answers or create all the answers, but to share time together, to explore the realities of the struggle that we're in, and to explore the possibilities of what might be true and possible, hopeful and loving, and to point ourselves towards that hopeful future. So, so thank you for living into that with me here on this time together. And we're gonna jump in with the others so that we can bring this all to a close and get y'all off to dinner. Okay, so she's telling us it's we've got a little time to go. So I don't want to bounce into Trish's room. They may be wrapping up. So
Can I say something before we get away?
oh, please do.
We're talking about coaching, and one of the things that you taught me, as a matter of fact, you always ask the question of, when you start out, well, what's on your mind today? What's on your mind today? And I think it's important when we coach somebody to ask that question and to take notes on that. So the next time we talk, to talk about that for a minute, because I think we have to help the coachee complete the cycle, if you were, with whatever their problem is, whatever it is. I don't know if you've read the book about burnout, completing the cycle of stress. Obviously, you can't be resilient if you're burned out. And if you put all that inside you and don't bring it out, it can be detrimental. So if you ask what's on their mind and they tell you, and you talk about it for a bit and then move on, and then you keep notes and ask about that again and again, I think it helps the coachee to work through the complete cycle of whatever that was a problem.
Yeah, I like that image of moving through the cycle of, what did you call it? I'm sorry, Jim. Would you say that again? To complete the cycle of what? Yeah, unmute yourself so we can hear you. You're still muted. Sorry.
I said the cycle of stress.
The cycle of stress. Thank you.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
That's right. To help people complete the cycle of stress, and that historical perspective of reminding them what they were working on previously with you might be helpful in resolving that and getting to a place where they've completed the cycle. Thank you. All right, well, I'm gonna bounce us out now. And so you can leave the room down in the lower right. And what that'll do is it'll kick us into the room with Trish. And I'm gonna assume, since it's 1 minute till, that she's wrapped up. But it's so good being with y'all, and I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. You'll be in another group tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you to my group for hanging with us, and we've got a new group coming in.
We're bouncing in.
Great.
Trish, we did takeaways in our small group. Did y'all do takeaways?
We did.
Okay, good. And I know Peg will have done that when she bounces back in. So you can end the breakouts, Trish. If you push the end breakouts button, it will give them like a minute to get out of their room.
Okay. Yep, thank you.
We had some folks that left altogether and are coming back in too.
This is stretching my technology ability like overkill here.
I'm back.
Good.
I'm glad. Hey, Jim.
Sorry, I'm a dangerous person with a mouse in my hand.
And Beth, I didn't see you earlier, but so hi. Glad you're here.
We're back.
Yay.
Is everybody back?
We've got 23, so that's how many we had before. 24.
Who's
Okay.
counting?
But who's
Doug,
counting?
yeah, Doug's iPad died, so he is gone for now. But he'll be back.
We've got some serious technology issues.
Died or
We also have one who rejoined us. Rob rejoined us, remember?
Yes, he did.
So if that number had been adjusted.
And Beth is with us, and June has changed chairs.
She has.
She's changed backgrounds. How were the breakouts, everybody? Yeah, good. Great. We're going to wrap up, and Steve is praying for us as we part. I'm wondering if you might, though, use your chat to enter what you're taking away from today's segment.
Please go ahead and do so.
Yes. And then Steve will wrap us up.
I will ask if any, I don't want to, we didn't discuss this at the beginning or in the big groups, and I don't think that I can pray for, all 24 of our individual concerns, but there may be something that's happening in your life that is urgent and that you'd like for us to lift up in prayer. And if there is, if you'll let me know, I'll be glad to include that.
And then tomorrow when we part, we're going to do a Mentimeter with prayer requests that we can all take with us. You can print that off and take with you. So please know that tomorrow we'll do a more comprehensive search. But Steve, there are so many things going on right now between the storms and just our very own people who have no technology at this point. That must be no power.
Yeah. Well, I just want to express my gratitude to be partners with you in this partnership of passion that we share, and the beautiful way that even though we came into this work at different times and have approached it, with different we've each brought our own lives into this, and our own heart, our own passion, our own experience. And we are richer for each other being here. And I am certainly, the most blessed of all to be able to be with y'all. So thank you for what you do. I want to say especially thank you for those of you that are serving in leadership in local churches right now, for the courage that it takes, to get up every day and to recognize you're walking into something. You're going to be challenged to do something that perhaps you've never done before. That something that you thought was working is going to stop working, and you'll have to figure it out on the fly. That your support structures have all been shifted on their axes and are sideways and upside down. All of the things that you're up against, I'm just proud of you for the courage that you show every day to get up and serve the church in that way. And for those of us who are in other roles of leadership and life in the church, the courage it takes to just face all that is happening in this world with pandemics and politics and windstorms and fires, alongside the ordinary stuff that happens to each one of us every day, that calls out our best and sometimes leaves us at our worst. And you do that. You persevere through it. And so thank you for that. I'm going to close with a word of prayer now, and then we'll be back on task with each other tomorrow morning at 9, bright and early at 9:30 in the morning. So let's pray together. Lord, we give you thanks for this day and for this beautiful group of people of which we are a part. We've been called according to your purpose as coaches in this organization, and also as coaches through your grace and your love, that we might help our clergy and laity and your churches have fruitful, lifelong, transforming, and resilient ministry. I pray for each one of them that you would allow them to rest in your loving arms this day, that where they are hurting, they would find comfort and healing. Where they're fearful, that they would find love to cast out their fears. Where they are anxious and worried, that they would be able to find a resilient hope that would allow them to look forward into a future that is in your hands. And I pray for you to give them grace sufficient for loving the people in their household tonight, that they might know they are loved and that they are loving. So pour your Spirit out upon us all as we part company. Keep us safe until we see each other again in the morning. And this we pray in your holy name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Great being with
Mwah.
you.
Night,
Bye.
everybody.
See you in the morning.
Bye.
Trish and Steve, can you hang on for a second?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll get dizzy as everybody leaves and
I know.
faces
It's like
flash all over the room.
zoom, zoom, zoom. Trish, I wasn't able to record. I don't know, when I tried, it said I needed permission from you. So did you record, Steve?
I did. Mine's recorded. Matter of fact, we're still recording, so let me stop my.
Are you